So this video is called "The GRE is not a math test." Why do I say that? Of course there's a lot of math in the GRE. Well, there's a lot of different skills involved in a typical math test that you're not really going to use as much on the GRE test. So let's go through a few. The typical math test, there is a lot of memorization. So this might be memorization of like a formula that you have to use. It might even be sort of a step-by-step method that you memorize in terms of how to do a certain type of problem that you've seen a lot in the chapter. On the real GRE, there might be some memorization involved, but not really that much. It's more about the skill of adaptation. So by that I mean you're going to see a problem, you're going to be like, okay, yeah, I think I recognize what concept's going on here. But the wording of the problem is going to be a little bit different than anything you've ever seen before. You're going to have to think a little bit to adapt. Now, of course, you might need to know some concepts for that problem, and in fact, conceptual skill is kind of a prerequisite to being able to adapt. You do need conceptual skill, but you also have to think. Okay, the normal math test may have a very narrow focus. So it's probably a narrow focus. By that I mean sort of like maybe a chapter from your math book, pretty predictable focus for the test. Whereas the real GRE has a really broad focus. So the real GRE will talk about arithmetic, so fractions, decimals, percents, ratios, algebra, solving equations and word problems, geometry, triangles, circles, lines, and data analysis, which is like statistics and probability. That is a ton of topics, guys. So really broad focus. The good news, it's kind of like the greatest hits of all of these topics in terms of concepts. There is a lot of math to know, but fortunately, it's not testing every single possible concept from these areas. So of course, where do we learn what's on the test? The ETS Math Review. And on my blog, I have a guide to using Khan Academy, which is a math learning website, to make sure that you really know those concepts. If you're in doubt, for some of you, it may be enough to just kind of go through the ETS Math Review. For others, you kind of might have to use Khan Academy exercises and or videos. So how else is a normal math test different? A lot of times a normal math test is really straightforward. The problems look like they could have come straight out of the math book. Your professor kind of wants everybody to do well. He or she might have a little bit of pressure from the administration to make sure everybody kind of gets a decent grade. Doesn't look good if people fail a class at most high schools and colleges. So the test is probably pretty straightforward and predictable if you study for it. Now the real GRE, unfortunately, not that predictable. It's a lot of times wordy and creative. Like I said at the beginning, you're going to probably recognize what the problem might be about, but it's going to be presented in a slightly different way than you've seen before. And you're just going to have to think a little bit and read it and figure it out, as opposed to sort of robotically just apply what you've learned from the homework. And then finally, a typical math test is pretty mechanical. So when you're doing a problem, it is sort of a normal series of steps that you might even be able to memorize, almost like an algorithm for a certain type of problem. When you read a problem, there's probably not too much that you're going to be confused by. In fact, many of the problems might not even have any words in them. The real GRE is going to be the opposite of that. It's going to be full of sort of the demands for reasoning, but also the opportunities for reasoning. And if you do see an opportunity for reasoning, it might be a shortcut, and it may make a hard problem quite a bit easier. Like I keep saying, the real GRE will make you adapt to what it wants you to do. So overall, I've made this video because I see a lot of students attempting to study for the real GRE with the same skills that worked for them in high school to study for like a calc test. That's not how the real GRE works. So what do? We realize that we do have to adapt. We start off with sort of a strong conceptual foundation. We get a lot of repetition with those concepts to make sure we've seen them from all different angles. And I really like the Manhattan 5-pound for that. So Manhattan GRE. And then we need as much experience. That's going to come partially from the 5-pound, but more importantly, from the ETS material, the books, and the power prep tests. So as you prepare for the GRE, remember it's going to be a little frustrating at first because a lot of problems look a little different than you've seen before, but keep at it. If you're rock solid with your concepts, you've gotten enough repetition from doing a crapload of 5-pound book problems, and you've not only done but thought about all the available ETS quant questions, you're setting yourself up to do pretty well.